I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to the San Mateo Planning Commission meeting for June 9th. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, can we start with roll call, please?
Chair Etheridge?
Yes.
Vice Chair Mallory?
Present.
Commissioner Maldonado?
Present.
Commissioner Williams?
Present.
Commissioner Ebnetter?
Okay, before we go to the consent calendar, I do want to remind everyone that due to the physical distancing protocols in place, at this time we continue to hold our regular Planning Commission meetings online. We encourage public participation remotely. Information on how to provide public comment is explained at the bottom of the published agenda. There are two ways to participate. One is join the Zoom meeting by clicking on the link at the top of the agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on at the appropriate times. The second is to phone in participation, which can be done by calling 408-638-0968 with the conference ID number 833-1401-7477. And you can press *9 to raise your hand to be called on. These options for public comment will remain available until the public comment period is closed for each specific item. Okay, we'll start with the first item on the consent calendar, which is review and approval of the minutes of the Planning Commission meetings for April 28th and May 26th. Did any commissioners have feedback or comments on the minutes that were provided?
No.
No.
Okay, can we have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes of the Planning Commission meetings of April 28th and May 26th, 2020.
I second that motion.
Okay, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Chair Etheridge?
Approve?
Vice Chair Mallory?
Yes.
Commissioner Maldonado?
Approved.
Commissioner Williams?
Approved.
Commissioner Ebnetter?
Approved.
Okay, those minutes for April 28th and May 26th pass 5-0. We will now move to the public comment portion of the meeting. If any members of the public are interested in speaking or commenting on an item that is not on the agenda, now would be the time to raise your hand or press *9. And I see that we do have one hand raised.
Okay, speaker I have is Carl Drake. Carl, give me a moment to unmute your microphone. Okay, Mr. Drake, I've allowed you to speak. You may unmute your mic.
Thank you very much for letting us speak. My name is Carl Drake, and I'm speaking from China Bee Restaurant. I did submit some comments for the meeting today. I don't know if they actually made it to you guys, but it was regarding the proposed closure of B Street from First Avenue to Baldwin Avenue. And we actually were blindsided by this proposal last week on June the 4th on a phone call with Jennifer Chen and Kathy Kleinbaum. And we were informed that, by Adam Simpson at Worst Hall that the city was moving forward on this. However, when we talked to Jennifer Chen or received communication from her via Miverna over at Mi Rancho, she said that the city has not decided to move forward yet. So we're just looking for some clarification if this is actually going forward and what is the dates and timelines that are proposed. On the Zoom call on June 4th, it was said that it possibly may go until November. This concerns us, China Bee Restaurant. We also have two other neighbors, Pokey Island and Donut Delight, and we share a common parking lot in between two buildings. that is actually the access point is from B Street. And all three businesses do exclusively takeout at this time. And unfortunately, we don't want to opt in on the outdoor dining at this time. So the increased cost for our smaller budgets would be prohibitive at this time. So we just want to have a discussion where Worst Hall can do their outdoor dining and we can have access to our parking area and, thoroughfare for vehicles to come through. So, we were discussing with other businesses down the street, such as Mi Rancho, La Cumbre, and Fusion Peruvian Grill and Video Loco. And they all were kind of surprised by this announcement as well. They have been notified that this block may be closed. And, in discussing it further, I talked to David Hunsaker at 31st Union, and he expressed interest in closing down Baldwin Avenue between Ellsworth and B Street. So that is a suggestion we felt fit both Worst Hall and 31st Union, or maybe just closing down one side of the street on B Street for Worst Hall and maybe Joyce Sushi if they so felt. I do appreciate the time that you allowed me to speak. I'd love to hear your comments.
Chair Etheridge, this is Gabrielle Whelan, Assistant City Attorney, and I have some information on this if it's appropriate to share it now.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. So I know that the City Council is taking up this subject, and I believe it will be discussed at their meeting on Monday, June 15th. And I will definitely pass this comment on to Jennifer Chen and Kathy Kleinbaum in the City Manager's office. Because they will be presenting at the meeting on Monday, and that starts at 7 o'clock. And so it would make sense to make the public comment at that meeting as well.
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Drake, for commenting. And it sounds like those are the people to reach out to share your concerns even in advance of that meeting. Do we have any other public commenters on items not on our agenda tonight?
I see no hands raised.
Okay, I do not either, so we will go ahead and close the public comment period. Before we move to the public hearing, the next item on the consent calendar, I will be recusing myself from tonight's study session. My wife is an employee of Holland & Knight, a law firm which is working with the applicant, although she's in a different practice group. Even though her practice is not related to the group working with the applicant, to avoid any perception of conflict of interest, I will recuse myself from this and any future agenda items which relate to the Concar Passage mixed use project. And Commissioner Mallory will chair the remainder of the meeting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Etheridge. Greetings, everybody. This is our study session on the design review for the Concar Passage Mixed Use Project PA 2018-052. And I'm going to turn things over to Rendell Bustos to give us his presentation.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair Mallory. Just want to confirm that you can see the presentation.
Yes.
Great. My name is Rendell Bustos. Interim Senior Planner. And this item is for a study session focusing on the design review for Concar Passage, PA 2018-052. So the purpose of this meeting item is to walk the Planning Commission through the updated design for Concar Passage. Staff will briefly discuss the design as well as the background, and then introduce the applicant and the architect to present the proposed design. The commission will then have the opportunity for questions and comments after the presentations and after receiving public comments. And lastly, I'd like to note that staff is not seeking a decision on the application at this time. So for some context, Concar Passage would redevelop the existing Concar Shopping Center, which is located on Concar Drive between South Grand Street and South Delaware Street. The site is approximately 14.5 acres in size and is zoned TOD for transit-oriented development. The project is a new mixed-use development containing 961 multifamily dwelling units, including 73 low-income units and 36 moderate-income units. It also includes 40,000 square feet of commercial and retail uses, which would include Trader Joe's, Peninsula Ballet Theater, 7-Eleven, restaurant uses, and a daycare facility for approximately 70 children. The project also includes 3 acres of community open space, a mobility hub called The Depot, as well as bike and pedestrian infrastructure improvements around the perimeter of the site. So for a bit of background, the project's design was first reviewed by the commission in March of 2018. And at this meeting, the commission provided input and comments on the design as it related to the site plan, as well as requests for increased open space, more variation in architectural style, increased bike and pedestrian improvements, and deeper building setbacks, and increased below-grade parking. Since that study session, the applicant submitted the formal application in September of 2018. The application has been reviewed by city staff and Larry Cannon of Cannon Design Group. Some comments found in Larry Cannon's latest letter include comments related to the parking layout, improvements to the parking layout, as well as open space and improvements to the architectural design. And Mr. Cannon concludes with no recommendations for changes. I'd like to note that Mr. Cannon is available during this meeting for questions that the Planning Commission may have. And recently, in April of 2020, the draft EIR was reviewed by the Planning Commission for adequacy and for comments. And the next step is that following this study session, the applicant will have an opportunity to revise the design before a public hearing later in the summer for formal action on the application. So to conclude, this is a list of the entitlements the application is anticipated to require. Again, no formal action is requested of the Planning Commission this evening, as the focus of the meeting is on the revised design. This concludes staff's presentation. I am available for any questions the commission may have for staff. The applicant, Brian Myers, and his architect, Peter Berger, will be providing a presentation showing the current project design. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall. Is the applicant ready for their presentation?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Mallory. This is Brian Myers. I'll be introducing our architect here in a second. I just wanted to give you a really quick, very brief background. As you're all aware, we have been at this for some time now. We've been designing this project for over 4 years, but as you just saw from the staff presentation, our official project application has been going on for the last 3. We have not only the submittal in 2018, but we did our formal community meeting in April of 2018, and then we had the study session that staff just talked about, and then we submitted our application in September of 2018. We've hosted over 40 community and stakeholder meetings over the past 3 years. We've also met with surrounding businesses that have all expressed their support for our plan to add market rate and affordable housing units to the neighborhood. That's been a big issue for them, and we appreciate their support. We've had an active outreach with a website, social media, several newsletters that we've updated and provided to the neighborhood on progress of the project. It's a long time that we've been out there since we've last had a public meeting, and so we wanted to make sure we continued to engage the community during that period of time. We've also had 5 distinct staff reviews. This is a large project. We understand it has a lot of complications to it, but we really appreciate the fact that we've been able to come together with staff on design changes that we think have met their needs and the original comments that we received from the Planning Commission and from the community. And we've incorporated a lot of those changes, and I'll have Peter talk to those in a minute. I'll also just want to mention, because it's not in Peter's presentation, but we've been working very closely with Public Works staff on improvements to both pedestrian and bike lane improvements surrounding the site. So including improvements to Delaware and to Concar, and a new pedestrian crossing at Grant, and then of course a new pedestrian and auto crossing with a new signal on Concar and the entry into the project. I just want to mention that because that's been a big issue for the community. It won't be in the design presentation here, but I just wanted to mention that we've been working on protected intersections at both Concar and Delaware, and Concar and a grant for protected intersections for bike lane improvements. And I know it's a big deal to the community and to the Planning Commission to make sure that we've incorporated those types of features into this project for the future of the project and mobility. So from that point, I really want to transition to Peter's presentation, which will really just be an update of how we've been addressing design changes. And so again, he'll make that fairly brief too. Peter's from MBE Architects, is the design lead for Passages at San Mateo for over the last 4 years. So he's actually been involved in this project from the start. Peter's going to share some highlights here, and I will be available for any comments after his presentation. Peter, please go ahead.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to the Commission for your time this evening. So yeah, the goal here is really to walk through where the current site plan is, highlight some key moments, introduce kind of where the rendering package is currently at, and just talk through again key moments between staff, between Larry Cannon and Cannon Design Group of where this project has really evolved to where it's at today. So can everyone see my screen, just to maybe start off
Yes.
on a good note? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start off with the site plan and really highlight a couple of key moments, and we have a couple of site sections, and then we'll jump to the rendering. So the overall site plan consists of 961 dwelling units. Of that 961 units, we have 109 affordable units, 73 very low income, which is required for our site. And then we're offering up an additional 36 moderate income units at an affordable level on site as part of a community benefit to offer more diverse kind of economic status of units. So, and then in addition to that, we have 7 live work lofts. So between the live work lofts, the affordable units, and the market rate units, we really are offering kind of the full package of units for the property. From a commercial standpoint, we're just over 40,000 square feet of commercial retail. And really in highlighting that is the 13,500 square foot Trader Joe's. And going through kind of the public process and public meetings, a lot of questions come up of why is Trader Joe's located in the bottom left-hand portion of the plan? And we really wanted to address that as, you know, this location didn't just happen by chance. It was a strong working relationship with Trader Joe's in our site plan to really ensure that Trader Joe's really was receiving everything they need, because it truly is a performing asset on the site today that a lot of the community does utilize, and we wanted to make sure that was being optimized through the development of this property. So this location does a series of things that I wanted to touch on. One of them is that, and we can go through this in the section in a second, but below these series of units, if you can see my cursor, is an on-grade screened parking field that's directly adjacent to the Trader Joe's store, and has all of the required parking needs for Trader Joe's. Secondly, this location does a really nice thing from a loading and trash compacting mechanical equipment that's required from a Trader Joe's. So we were able to locate all those features in a pullout on our private road here with public access on this passageway that's really screened from the rest of the community. So this is really to be a fully functioning 13,500 square foot commercial center without having to see kind of the nuts and bolts of what it takes to accomplish a Trader Joe's such as this. And then lastly, or not lastly, excuse me, the other thing that was very key in this location is that there's several points of access. So if you're on Grant Street, you can connect through Passageway and tuck into the parking garage. If you're on Delaware, you can tuck onto Depot Way and tuck into the parking garage. And same with Concar Drive, and connect through to our internal street on Depot Way and connect to the parking garage. So in terms of ease of access, not only from a vehicular standpoint, but also pedestrian, bike, there's a really kind of great sense of access for Trader Joe's. And then finally, and quite possibly the most important, is Trader Joe's currently exists over in the Building 4 location on site where my cursor is right now. And one of the things that was critical to the applicant, to the development team here, is that we didn't want Trader Joe's to go dark. So Building 1 is happening in our first phase, and while this is being built, the existing Trader Joe's will stay open, which will allow for Trader Joe's, again, not to go dark and still allow for the overall community to benefit from that asset, which we know is definitely important. The second component that I want to bring light to is the peninsula, and Brian touched on it, I think actually Brendel touched on it as well, but the Peninsula Ballet currently exists on site roughly in this location of our Building 5. And through community meetings and understanding of what the benefit of having that studio in this location and what that meant, we realized it was an important asset that we wanted to keep on site. So what we've done is introduced off of Concar Drive with great visibility, just over 5,200 square foot ballet studio where we've worked very closely with them on dimensional requirements, height requirements. We're doing some interesting things with the concrete just to make sure that space is functional for their use. And this would be their studio space. And then in addition to that, providing just over 3,200 square foot actual performance space that's located on Delaware. And although these two locations might seem a little bit distant, but internally, just subterranean to a lot of these uses is actually a bigger parking field. So access to both those locations there's definitely an ease of access to both those cited uses. Additionally, we've worked with the YMCA, that's just across Grant Street, to provide an on-site daycare that's going to serve roughly 60 to 70 children. And in addition to that daycare, they have their own parking field at the base of Building 5 at grade. And then behind that, in a covered location protected by the building geometry and massing, would be just over 5,000 square feet of actual protected outdoor play area, which obviously is very important for that daycare and getting kids that protected and secure and safe outdoor space. So some of these components, along with some of the affordable components, and again, like Brian had just mentioned, not necessarily outlined in black and white here, but some of the off-site protected bike intersections and bike lane improvements, it kind of goes to the overall breadth of community benefit that's being offered up by the project. Additionally, and I'm going to kind of flip-flop these two items here. I apologize, but I'm going to start with this point of 100% screen parking. Perhaps one of the biggest changes from our 2018 Planning Commission study session is we had a series of buildings on site that were actually of a wrap product, being that it's an on-grade parking structure, 4 or 5 stories tall, wrapped by apartment units. And perhaps one of the biggest changes that we did fundamentally, which allowed for a trickle effect of a lot of positive things to happen on the site plan, is we took away those wrap buildings and we actually introduced subterranean podium parking. So the parking is actually completely screened from view. And what that's done is a series of things, and it's really allowed for a couple major things to happen. One in particular is our central open space was able to grow substantially. One of the comments from 2018 and from Canon Design Group was to create a serious effort of opening up that open space, making it more usable, having an actual more hardscape kind of plaza, and secondly, having a more open park plaza for park uses. So that was definitely something that we focused on with this massing move and getting that parking structure out of here and freeing up and loosening up some of the site. In addition to that, the landscape courtyards kind of really throughout the site were allowed to grow in size and really get redesigned to really take advantage of all of the residual land by taking out those structures. And then finally, and perhaps one of the biggest kind of features is we were able to loosen up a lot of the massing. So before, for example, Building 4 was one big solid building. And by removing that structure, we were able to create more porosity through the site. There's definitely connections that would be happening from a pedestrian standpoint. And then in addition to that, really significant massing and breaks, especially along Concar Drive in Building 4, kind of where my cursor is hovering. We have a 35-foot height limit on the first 45 feet of setback along Concar Drive. And we're able to do that really and solve that kind of not at a minimum, but really per the requirement on this Building 2 function. But on Building 4, we were able to pull that back even further. So it didn't seem like, hey, we're just addressing the massing requirement and calling it a day. We're actually breaking that massing in a much more substantial and much more functional kind of standpoint and making this building really feel like a 3-story building with a 4-story building much further beyond versus kind of what's happening per the requirement where it's 35-foot height limit just for that first 45 feet, and then directly beyond that, popping up the extra story. So those are some of the big moves. And then in addition to that, between buildings 3 and 4, if you remember, there was a big parking structure that actually exposed itself to the 92, and that's now being completely removed. And so introducing full architecture, an actual full building break in the massing, introducing a new building in building 5, and really starting to break down the scale and the mass of some of these larger buildings. So a lot of residual effects to screening the parking that moves into the increased open space. And then with that, one of the big items that we studied very closely with Larry Cannon is this internal passage that we've drawn a lot of attention to, where it starts at the seed food hall, you're able to come up through a ceremonial set of stairs and really bringing the public into a direct shot and really very comfortable pedestrian passage through to our Arts Plaza. And one of the things that we thought that Larry brought to light was really a concern about this connection from this upper level podium down to the Arts Plaza, wanting to make that more organic, not necessarily more architectural in feel, but more part of the actual plaza and extension of the landscape. And so we worked very closely with him on that, and we have a rendering to show how that condition has really evolved into something much more organic, much more inviting, not so harsh and architectural, but really, again, an extension of the landscape. So in addition, the next kind of point I really wanted to make, and this is, again, working very closely with Larry Cannon. I know it was passed over pretty quickly, like we worked with Larry Cannon, we went through some of his design options, but what we did is we actually did a complete overhaul based on staff comments, based on Larry's comments, to take a hard look at architecture. Before, we had a very strong, really big kind of moment of unifying architecture throughout the pedestrian passage that moves really from west to east or vice versa, through the site. And speaking with Larry and talking with Larry, we actually started to break down that language into a smaller kit of parts. So it didn't feel like these big, massive buildings. It felt like a series of moves that, not necessarily to use the phrase of something built over time, but really a smaller kit of parts that started to feel like a contemporary village. And I can get into some of those points when we get into the renderings. And with that not overhaul of architecture, but with that notion, we really wanted to, and this is really this next point of Eichler-inspired architecture at our focal intersections. One of and especially as an architect, one of the great adjacencies to our property is the Eichler neighborhood at 19th Avenue Park. And, Eichler architecture is such an incredible, iconic, especially to California, both northern and southern. And being adjacent to one of those neighborhoods, we wanted to really pay respect to that in our smaller, more focal intersections. That pops up in Seed Food Hall as well as the 7-Eleven to really pay respects to that adjacency. And then finally, the last noted space is there's 29,300 square foot of interior private open space. But as you can see, majority of these open spaces have actually been located along the passage to activate those uses and activate our series of spaces. So there's a couple of additional points I'll touch on as we walk through the renderings, but those are some big items that I wanted to cover, at least at a site plan level. So there was two key building sections that I wanted to cover before we jump into renderings. And really one of them is, if you see in the upper right-hand corner through our key plan, is connecting us through the public passage, as we're calling it. And it really starts at the Seed Food Hall, where my cursor is here, off of Delaware, and then beyond on Concar. And it shows how we're bringing people up at a public level onto our podium, and as direct of a connection as possible from our main retail food and beverage over to our central art plaza and park plaza. Very purposeful, wanting to bring users within the site, wanting the public to really engage those spaces was something that we focused on. And again, Larry, it was very key, and staff was very key that we, complimentary that we designed these focal stairs adjacent to Seed in a very beneficial way, and wanted to introduce, as I said earlier, some of that same kind of character and quality to the transition down to the Arts Plaza on the right as well. So that's kind of to that same notion of I'll get to a rendering here in a second that kind of explains that a little bit further. So that was one section I wanted to run through to make sure that was very clear. And then secondly was really addressing Trader Joe's. So this is cut through Trader Joe's, this section B. So we're starting on Delaware, cutting through Trader Joe's, really the residential and the parking field adjacent. So we do have some parking that's subterranean, and that's for the residential units specifically. And then Trader Joe's existing at grade off of Delaware, and the adjacent parking field for their required use, where users will be able to come in, park at the same height, and just walk right into the back of the store and just function in a real smooth and clean way, where it's concealed and operates cleanly as part of the overall community, but it still addresses all the needs and all the functionality that Trader Joe's is really after. So those are some key site sections that I wanted to highlight. And sticking with Trader Joe's, that's really the first rendering that I wanted to bring up on screen, and this is really taken from Delaware Street. And what I'm going to do with these renderings is walk around the property and then go internal. So just to understand, everyone can get their bearings on how these series of spaces are going to be presented. But first is the Trader Joe's. So again, citing the Trader Joe's for the series of reasons noted earlier. You would have a parking entry here that would be off of our Central Depot Way. And then one of the things that I think, and I'm going to try and annotate as I go here, but one of the things that was, again, I talk about these massing breaks and these opportunities once we got rid of the wrap parking garages. We started to get really, really fantastic results of massing breaks and really being able to break down the scale and movement of these buildings by, Trader Joe's is really going to be felt as 2 stories of residential on top of a Trader Joe's as opposed to 3 in other cases on the property. So it feels like a smaller building. The significant massing break that happens mid-block with some elevated landscape is going to, again, allow this building to kind of break down in scale, which we think are some really nice effects of burying that parking, screening that parking, and going to a more of a podium design versus the wrap. Sorry, let me clear. Okay. And second, moving down Delaware, we come to the Seed Food Hall. And this is really when we get into that Eichler-inspired architecture, with the very, very iconic roof forms and really this post and beam minimalist structure that allows for abundance of natural light and really just kind of a purist in terms of the architectural character and style. And we really wanted to be respectful of, again, our adjacency and again, one of the things I love about this building is that we're taking our most absolute important corner, really at Concar and Delaware, arguably our most important corner, and we're actually breaking the scale down of this project significantly. We're not flexing out our units in this location and saying, hey, let's actually, flex our muscles here. It's actually peeling back and getting more of a jewel building and making the 960 units that are beyond actually feel less important and making the Seed Food Hall the focal point and more important in breaking down that scale. So we love what this building is doing, not only from an exterior standpoint, but also from an interior standpoint, which is this next rendering. So one of the big moves with the interior and why I wanted to really get at this rendering and explain it to everyone is we organized the series of spaces within the food hall to actually be not very efficient, to be honest, but have this diagonal orientation which orients you towards the focal stairs, so that once you get your food items, your coffee, your goods, you can actually take your product, move out. You're directed directly at these stairs, inviting you up onto the upper level of podium, and again directly through that public passage to our centralized, enlarged 3+ acre park. So that's something that was very purposefully done. Trying to bring people into the project. And we just see that this is such a big pull from not only the transit adjacent, obviously the Heinz office development across the street, as well as Station Park Green, pulling people into this use and into the project. And finally, additionally wrapping the corner here as we get to Concar Drive, and this is where we have the 35-foot height limit. And so here in this particular rendering, we're highlighting the ground floor, and this is where the Peninsula Ballet will house its ballet studio. Again, roughly just over 5,200 square feet of ballet studio. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but we worked very closely with them on achieving ceiling heights, actually depressing the concrete slab to get additional height in here to allow for the studio space that they desired, and obviously keep them on site. And before, we used to have a series of live work lofts here, and that was quickly removed, obviously, after the impact and comments from the public of wanting to keep this asset on site because they thought it was a great community benefit. So introducing art components that all relates to the ballet theme, creating key signage opportunity for them to really brand themselves in this location, and offering up architecture that really is slightly different from the rest of the project. Again, starting to break down these kit parts of the architecture so it feels like a series of components versus a bigger grand gesture. Moving along Concord Drive, we get to really the break of how we connect to Depot Way to the internal of our project. So we're on Concord here. Right behind us is the 19th Avenue Park neighborhood, where there currently is a crosswalk, but here we'd be actually introducing a signalized protected crosswalk, allowing users from the 19th Avenue residential neighborhood, 19th Avenue Park neighborhood to actually cross safely and bring them into our project and be able to access our public park as well. And this crosswalk actually connects directly to their public park, their park component, excuse me, to that neighborhood. So the relationship of uses and open spaces is very strong. And then in addition to that, one of the things that we focused on and actually enlarged from, again, feedback, is the section between these two buildings, building 2 on the right, building 4 on the left, actually increased significantly to allow for more visibility into this space. Instead of compressing the space and then expanding it internally to the park, we opened it up more. And this happened both on the Depot Way connections from Concord and Delaware to, again, allow for more visual connectivity to the central open space. In addition to that, one of the items that I wanted to point out here is this is where, again, freeing up some of that parking allowed us for much more substantial, beyond what we're required by code and zoning in terms of a massing break and respecting that 35-foot height limit. So here we're doing that, and we're extending that back beyond to a much more logical breaking point, which does a couple of things. Again, it makes this building really feel like a 3-story component that then has a 4-story component beyond, 5-story component beyond. But it also does, some other interesting things too, where there is an enclosed courtyard beyond here. It's going to allow more light and air to flow into that space and not feel so condensed. So that space should be feeling better, and improvements there. So a lot of big improvements happen to, again, taking this parking structure that used to exist in our building 4 and actually going subterranean with that. Swinging around, we're on Grant Street. We're getting a glimpse of 7-Eleven in the foreground. But taking some of these key architectural elements that we started to introduce, as you saw in the Peninsula of LA, for signage opportunity, actually bringing that component over here to try and break massing, break the visual connectivity of certain parapet lines, and starting to get some more movement in our actual elevation. That was, again, a direct result of working with Larry Cannon on some of these elements. And then now we're going to swing more internally focused to the project, and we're going to start with the depot. And the depot was described, I believe, by Rendell about, the Depot Mobility Hub was describing. This is a focal point in the community where, transit and shuttle and rideshare and package deliveries all really happen. But we've worked very closely, not only with staff, but just internally on the functionality of all those uses coming together. So we've located, you can get a glimpse of one of the rideshare buses over here, but we've actually located a substantial drop-off zone to allow for these things to function and happen, but not really disturb what's really going on in the Arts Plaza that you're seeing to the right. So that's one of the big things that we wanted to make sure and highlight, is we paid very close attention to that. Then the other thing that I mentioned previously, we worked very close with Larry on, was this transition. If you recall, the previous design here had a much more rigid, much more architectural, hard-lined kind of approach and direct approach of getting you up onto the second level of podium through the public passage. And now we've introduced a much more organic structure. It actually turns and angles and allows for more light and air to penetrate through the structure with a much more organic support system. and a series of steps that, not just a direct run, but a series of actual landings that allows you to stop and pause as you move through this moment. So much more inviting, a much more extension of the landscape versus an extension of the architecture. And we must admit that this was a great comment that came through, and we feel like the overall outcome here is definitely a benefit from where we started. And then internal to the depot is where really all the parcel lockers are going to be. There's talk about having a small commercial component in a coffee shop, really highlighting, when the next, when the next Uber, when the next shuttle things are happening. So it's really an internal community gathering space that draws people together, and that's another opportunity to kind of bring people to this central feature of the large plaza. Kind of elevating ourselves and turning, looking more inwardly to the overall plaza space, where you have the Arts Plaza in the foreground and the Park Plaza in the background. You start to get a glimpse of the additional architectural character that's been introduced. So here, previously, we had one architectural style really strongly connecting these spaces that really started to, for better or worse, overemphasize the overall massing and just size of these buildings. And what we've worked really close on with staff and Larry is actually breaking down the architectural styles to a series of vertical and horizontal moves, introduction of new materials, to really break down the scale of these buildings to, again, feel like a kit of parts versus an overall gesture. So very purposeful, definitely a big change from where we were, and you can definitely see it in this view. The other thing that I did want to note is through this central open space where we have the actual Depot Way connecting through and almost splitting our park spaces, is we've introduced an enhanced paving and really also a traffic table that when you step up onto this, from a driving standpoint, when you get up onto this road in this condition, you'll be on raised pavers that will be flush with the curb. So it'll really feel like an extension of the plaza. And the whole goal here is really to allow for vehicular movement, but really make it feel uncomfortable and put the pedestrian as the priority. And we think this is a great way to help transition people through this space. It allows for special events to happen where, you can close down this central space and this entire plaza can become one cohesive space without feeling like you're standing in the middle of a quote unquote street. So some very intentional moves were made on how the treatment of this internal road on Depot Way was handled. Bringing ourselves up to the transition from Building 2 down into the Arts Plaza, there's a series of overlooks that allow you to experience the central plaza space, whether that be the Arts or the Park Plaza, from an elevated experience, which we think is key in just how these apartment communities are starting to live, where it's not only about living in either the ground floor or up in your unit, it's about experiencing these spaces at a series of levels. So what we absolutely love about the project is you have a level 2 experience here from this elevated podium. You obviously can experience from the ground level. We have rooftop decks located at both levels 4 and 5. So there's just ample opportunities to experience, especially this Central Park Plaza and Art Plaza from a series of spaces, which we think is just a really interesting connectivity of social spaces and really activating this central our Central Plaza area. Jumping to another one of those decks, we were down in this location here, and now we're crossing the central plaza here with the Art Plaza in the distance and the Park Plaza in the foreground. You're getting a sense of that enhanced paving through the center then as we transfer back to a more typical condition. But again, here seeing the breadth of architecture from moving from kind of element to element, again, not feeling as before as this one big cohesive move, but breaking down the scale. And then finally ending on this slide where we're more in the actual Park Plaza, down in the space. But again, showing more of the breadth of the architecture. This is actually where the main central leasing is going to occur on this corner where my cursor is. But again, here also kind of highlight the building to building dimension and that increase of dimension and the increase of the public open space to that 3+ acres from where we were before is just helps create more visual connectivity from the surrounding streets to our internal park space. So with that, I thank you. I'm going to obviously here for any questions. I'm going to leave it on the site plan so there's a clear talking point if anyone wants to highlight anything, but happy to jump through the presentation or reference anything, and obviously here for any questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Why don't we start off with questions from the commissioners, and then we will go to public comment and then circle back for commissioner comments. So does anyone have any questions for our staff or our applicant?
Chair, I have a couple of questions. From the original proposal that was submitted, I believe the study session that we did last year to this year, was understanding that there are both two different site plans. What was the number of dwelling units that you had proposed within the old site plan compared to this updated site plan?
The previous site plan had 935 units.
Okay. And then, I believe in your description, you had said that the Depot Way has both access to the Arts Plaza, but it also has access from Concord using Depot Way into the Trader Joe's, correct?
Sorry, could you rephrase that one more time? I apologize.
So in one of your depictions, you had individuals walking across the different park plazas to the art plazas, but you also had vehicles going through those two different plazas. So that's the same actual Depot Way, is the same way that people will also be accessing the Trader Joe's parking lot, correct?
Correct. There's a series of ways that people can access Trader Joe's. If they're accessing it from Concar, you can come through Depot Way. You can also access it from Delaware Street from Depot Way as well and turn in. And then if you can also access it as well from Passageway if you're coming from Grant and connect into the parking field.
Okay. One final question. Of the actual 41,000 square feet of commercial and retail, you've already have contracts with different corporations and businesses and things like that. Of the actual, is it already 100% filled for all that square footage?
Commissioner Maldonado, this is Brian Myers. It is not. It's substantially filled. We have the Trader Joe's, obviously the 13,500 feet. We do have the Peninsula Ballet that we've been working with. We have the food hall that we will operate, and then an adjacent restaurant space that'll still be leased. And after that, we really just have a minor amount of, and the 7-Eleven, that was relocated. After that, we have a minor amount of retail that you'll see there on Depot Way and Delaware on the corner. And just so you know, by the way, that's been a subject of conversation with the community too. We have been investigating ways to find a pharmacy use. As you know, the pharmacy space, meaning pharmacy business, has changed quite substantially just in the last couple of years. But we do know that there are some pretty interesting concepts out there that are more local in nature for pharmacies. And that's one of the things that we've been looking at. I don't know if that was one of your questions, but we do have a minor amount of space left on the plan, yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm done. Yeah.
Thanks, Romero. John or Margaret?
I can go ahead. Okay. Can you hear me? I'm not muted, right? Okay, good. Let's see. So it is 7-Eleven that's moving to that corner and not the current jewelry store. Is that correct?
Sorry, just had to unmute. Yes, that is correct. So Shane will not be relocating on the site. 7-Eleven is currently more mid-block right now. So it's a little bit closer to the intersection with Depot Way. It's not quite that far. And we had to negotiate a separate deal with them to make sure we got them over to the corner. Just so you know, we didn't own that space. We still won't own that space, the 7-Eleven. We had to work out a relocation and a new building because we thought it was pretty important to get a new building there on the corner that look great for the project and the community, but Shane will no longer be in the project.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. Let's see, just a couple questions just to make sure I'm oriented. Can you show me where I don't need to see all of them, but like like where's the access to the parking levels? Like, is that out on the main streets, or is that along Depot Way, the driveways to the below grade parking?
Peter, would you like to handle that?
Okay, I see one.
Yeah, there's a series of them. I'm gonna start to mark them up on the screen, and
Right.
if there's any questions, bear with me. And there's two connections over here somewhere. I apologize. It's not perfectly annotated. There's a ramp that happens here. There's also an additional connection over here, and then for the daycare use. There is a actual drive-through and parking field just at the ground floor, just for the daycare use only. That's one way in obviously this direction, and one way out to handle all the parking for that daycare facility.
Mhm.
But I believe I have them all. If I'm missing any, please, Brian.
Yeah.
I know you.
Yeah.
So it's a mix of out on the main streets and also within the Depot Way areas or passageway areas.
Yeah, Commissioner Williams, this is Brian Myers. So you'll notice, by the way, thank you, Peter. I think you got them all. You'll notice that we really did limit the amount of access on the public streets. We do have the majority of them are on the private streets in the project. Obviously, we had to have some that were on the public street, but we tried to limit those. The one that's on Concar that you see where Peter put the arrow that's near the corner of Concar and Delaware. That one happens to be one that's actually going to be serving primarily the on-grade parking for the retail uses and the ballet there. The one off of Grant really will be a residential entry, but the only really pure residential entry that comes off the public streets will be Grant, the one you see on Grant, because the daycare use, the retail parking off of Concar, those are both primarily for commercial uses, not for residential uses.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of add on to that, so Passageway is currently, like probably behind Rite Aid and Ross and all of that, or it's, maybe it's not there, but that's on this site currently.
Yeah, Commissioner Williams is actually almost mimics it. Obviously, there's some design changes in the width, how it functions, but you're right. It largely functions in the same capacity as the current road that goes behind the existing center.
Okay. Just to kind of get my bearings. Let's see. I have a couple other questions. So the stairs that are really kind of a feature element next to the Seed Food Hall, and that take you onto that public passage over to the Arts Plaza. Can you indicate to me like where the ramps are or the accessible features? I'm sure there are some, and I'm just don't. And I know this is very schematic, but how will you handle accessibility?
It's a great question. So we have an accessible condition with a lift in this location here, where I kind of scribbled in very nicely in the blue, and that's what's allowing the people to come in and access and come up and pop out. And then in addition to that, on the flip side, we're utilizing this elevator here from an accessibility standpoint, where you're able to come to the elevator, drop down and pop out into the Arts Plaza.
Okay, yeah, because when I saw the the renderings, or the 3D renderings, I guess, it was clear that it was a fairly it's a big rise, I should say, of stairs. So that would be too much to handle with a ramp, accessible ramp. Okay. I think I had one other question. I guess the other question was, so I think I read in the history, there's 175 pages in this packet. So, I know there's a lot of work and a lot of information here and a lot of history. And so there was, I think, talk about maybe on Grant Street, the kind of, I don't have the wording, but breaking up, I guess the elevations along Grant Street or along the streets. So along Delaware and Concar, I can kind of see that they're definitely stepped back, like right where it says Concar, it looks like it's a fairly generous pedestrian experience. So what about like on Grant Street or Delaware? Are those, can you give me some sense of what those are like in terms of pedestrian? Are they wide enough, or maybe there's one of the elevations that you could just go back to for a minute so I could take a look at the.
Yeah, I can definitely go back. One of the things I wouldn't mind explaining and plan though before we move on, Commissioner, is that what we've done along Grant Street is, we were able to, on some of these moves, especially on Delaware and Concar, really substantially break the mass and the entire building down in scale. Along Grant Street, instead of actually breaking the entire building down, what we've done is to get more movement in the architecture and more massing break, we've done a series of actually dropping units at the top floor in a couple of key locations to, again, break the massing and scale down along that elevation. And then the second thing that we've done that I want to just highlight and plan is we worked with Larry really closely on what the actual sections and how these buildings are actually meeting the ground, how the units are really addressing the sidewalk and the street. And that happened, really all around the project, but it was a continual comment from Larry that, again, I commend him for making it because it helped us push some of those moments and just play up how these buildings do meet the ground in a very pedestrian friendly way.
Yeah.
Let me pull back and see if I can't. Give me 1 second here.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of my question. Like maybe as I look at it, how is it addressed on Grant Street? Because that looks more it looks more irregular along the other areas and maybe more generous, whereas Grant looks like a more regular kind of sidewalk and not as generous.
Yeah, so this is the Grant Street rendering where introducing stoop locations and gated entries, and obviously a parkway between the landscape and obviously our buildings and landscape. So those are some of the moves that we definitely tried to work on. Here's one of those building massing drops that occurred here on this location. You can start to see on the left hand of the screen that helps kind of break down some of that scale.
My thing is blocking it. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's an effective way to break it down.
I'll add, Commissioner Williams, that we also did a fair amount of thought and planning around where the pedestrian flow is going to come through the site and where we want to encourage it. There's a little bit of social engineering going on here. So what we're really trying to do is emphasize people coming through the project. And so, Peter, if you could go back to the site plan really quickly. I just want to point out that on Grant Street, this was, I'm glad you brought this up, Commissioner Williams, but on Grant Street, that was actually a focus of our conversation. You'll see very lightly on the right-hand side there near the T of the Grant Street. It's kind of hidden by that. We're doing a protected pedestrian crossing from the both the office project and the YMCA from the east. And we're trying to get as many of those people not taking that crosswalk up at Grant and Concar, but accessing this crossing here and going through our passage into the park, and of course into the both the retail and the food offerings in the project. We're really trying to encourage public access there. And again, that's not to downplay the importance of having comfortable pedestrian access along Grant, but I just wanted to tell you that we spent a fair amount of time trying to put our emphasis around encouraging people to take these off-street paths. Because as you know, that's where most people really enjoy their experience, is not next to a car, but actually off-street. And we've had a fairly generous offering of those through the project. Just wanted to point that out as one of the philosophies of the project too.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And I mean, I can see that that's, really only residential. Well, not only residential, but, it kind of has a more residential block feel, like you're walking down a block, as opposed to a more commercial size, I guess, along Concar in Delaware. Okay. That's all the questions I have.
Thanks, Margaret. John, do you have questions?
Yes, I do. Through the chair. The daycare, is that a joint venture with YMCA with some hope of subsidized pricing for that facility? It's a question.
Would you like me to address that now, Commissioner Ebnetter?
Please.
Okay, yes. So it's an operational agreement that we will have with the YMCA. They've been a terrific partner. And as you know, they do have fairly aggressive programs, and we'll employ them here on subsidized rates for those that can't afford market rates. We are going to give, because it's important to the operation of this project too, some preference to residents here, but it's oversubscribed for the residents' typical residential demand that we would have in a project like this. So as the reason why we picked the YMCA is not only are they a neighbor to our east, but they have quite a history in providing for daycare needs of all income levels and have a great history in the Bay Area and frankly across the country. And that's why we picked them specifically. So for us, we look at this as both an amenity for our residents, but also as an amenity for the community, not necessarily as a commercial operation that was meant to be a profit-making operation for our project.
Fantastic, thank you. Will Building 5 be the location of all of the affordable units?
No, Commissioner Ebnetter, it is the location for the 76 very low units. You will notice in both the renderings and in the plans, and Commissioner Vice Chair Mallory, I apologize for the number of pages in the plans. I think we heard a couple of comments about that. It is a lot of work. But anyway, in the plans, you will see that those units in that building is designed of very like styles. You couldn't tell the difference from the rest of the buildings, and all the amenities will be fobbed in for residents in the 76 unit or 73 unit building, excuse me, for all of the amenities in the project. That was really important to us and frankly important to staff. It wasn't just driven by us. And that would be a building that we would partner with a nonprofit on. In addition to that, we are offering through our development agreement an additional 36 moderate units that will be spread equally through the rest of the project. We're actually detailing out both the phasing and implementation features in summary with the staff right now. And we plan that to be, again, an equity spread of moderate units throughout the project and a partnership with a nonprofit on Building 5 for the 73 very low units.
Perfect. One last question for the handling of deliveries and garbage haul out for Trader Joe's. Where will that be located? And will there be hours, restrictive hours, since it's adjacent to the residential units?
Yes, another good question. That was, we spent a lot of time designing that. Both the compactor unit, the recycling features for it are all off of Passageway, where they will be least obstructive to residential. And I shouldn't say of course, but yes, there will be operating hours with Trader Joe's of both deliveries and certain types of activities with Trader Joe's. We also ground mounted all of the refrigeration and HVAC equipment so that it wasn't, so you couldn't see it off of Delaware. It'll be shielded off of Passageway as well. And it kind of speaks to where Peter had talked earlier about deliveries, all of the, I'll call them nuisance uses of compacting and trash and ground mounted equipment will all take place off of Passageway adjacent to the 92. There will be a few units on top, which is why we want to have some operational guidelines in our agreement with Trader Joe's, but they're aware of that.
Perfect. And for the ped and bicycle work, would it be better for me to wait for the final drawings, or do you have an overview of what you've got going on for the bikes and the peds at this point?
Yeah, so I can describe them in narrative, but you will be seeing them in the package that comes to you for the next round. We have just now, we're actually finalizing those by the end of the week. It's been, working through a fair amount of detail with Public Works staff and trying to make sure that all of that works. So on Delaware, we're going with an option that has a protected bike lane on both the northbound and southbound Delaware Street. So we'll have it on both sides of the road. On Concar, it'll be a cycle track on one side of the road, on the north side of the road. I'm hoping I'm describing that correctly. I'll have Tracy step in if I didn't. And then protected intersections that are, honestly, they're modified. They're what we could do with the right-of-way that we have, but they're protected bike intersections at Concar and Delaware and Concar and Grant. We obviously did not want to, take property from residential communities or existing new buildings, so we had to work within the right-of-ways that we had. But we I think I won't speak for the staff, but I believe that they're satisfied with the designs that we put together there. And I don't know if Tracy wants to speak to that at all.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I'm here. Hi, this is Tracy from Public Works. Just generally speaking, I think Brian mentioned all the improvements. I mean, just on a high level. So the improvements on the Delaware side are we're looking at a class 4 on Delaware, and it could be either a separated bike lane on either side, or for example, it could be a cycle track on either the project side or the opposite side, and that is kind of getting worked out right now. We're not going to have a final design during the PA phase, but it'll be something that'll be finalized during the building permit. But we just want to ensure that the current right-of-way can accommodate that class 4 on Delaware. And correct on Concar, it's also a class 4. That's a cycle track on the north side. And then we have class 4 on Grant as well. And right now we're looking at separated bike lanes on either side for Grant.
Thank you. I do know at one point there was some discussion years ago about a scramble type of intersection at Concar and Delaware. Is that still in the mix, or that's just going to be looked at with the traffic study to see what would be required?
Yeah, that would be something that would be reviewed probably during the building permit phase, given the timing and other improvements that are going to be happening at the intersections. It may or may not be feasible. So that's something that would be looked at in more detail during building permit. But there are going to be significant improvements for bike and peds at the intersections of Delaware, Concar, and Grant and Concar as well.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions. Is that Helen?
Thank you, John. Okay, I will fire mine off. I was interested in the roundabout over in the area of the Art Plaza and the Park Plaza. And I believe I heard that the traffic study has not been done yet, but is there any estimate of how many cars would be going around that roundabout in a given time period, like an hour during the day?
So this is Brian Myers, Vice Chair Mallory. I know we actually have done traffic study work. I'll let maybe Rendell can answer that question. I don't have it at my fingertips, and Rendell, I don't know if you have access to it, but there was some study from Hexagon and also another consultant the city hired to independently look at that. We had Farron Pierce, our consultant, look at it as well. And I just don't know off the top of my head the number of cars that were planned to go through there. I don't know if maybe during the course of our discussion here we could find that. But
well, is it obviously without seeing it in real time, it's hard to know. But
Yeah.
is Depot Way planned to be a thoroughfare? How
No, it's
many
not.
different
Yeah.
how many different entrances will come off of that lane?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's actually been a lot of what we've been trying to plan around is to not have Depot Way be a main thoroughfare, but in fact, primarily just there's two reasons that the roundabout exists. One is that we do believe aesthetically it provides for a softer intersection there at the elbow. But I would tell you that the other reason it exists is that for someone that makes a mistake on Depot Way and turns going eastbound off of Delaware into onto Depot Way and misses the parking structure. That does happen. We wanted to have a place for someone to tastefully do a U-turn around that space and not have to go back out to Concar to get there. The only single signalized intersection that allows for left turns into the site, I think this is correct, will be at Depot Way in Concar, where we have a full T signalized intersection there. But we believe that with the addition of passageway and 2 entries into the garage there, with Depot Way and having 2 entries there and access off of Delaware, as well as access off of Depot coming southbound off of Concar, that we have a fair distribution of trips and there won't be a concentration of people using that elbow there. We've also, as Peter kind of showed earlier, Vice Chair Mallory, there was intentionally designed both residential and commercial access ways before you ever get to that intersection into the garages, again, to try to preclude people using that main intersection. It exists there for a couple of purposes. One is for EVA access, because we needed to have clear access for fire trucks coming through the site. And it exists there really for another alternative for someone coming to Trader Joe's, but not a primary alternative.
Okay.
And for someone that makes a mistake. So that's really
well, that would probably be me.
Yeah.
But it's when I was first looking at this schematic, my question was, well, why are there 2 lanes that don't connect? But because it has a different material being used, it doesn't necessarily look like a road. So my question also along that area is, will there be some kind of fencing along the Park Plaza and Depot Way? And the only reason I ask that is if there are a lot of kids that use that park, it may, I just wondered if you had considered anything to go as a barrier,
so
see-through barrier, light barrier, whatever.
Yep. So again, and some of this, by the way, will come at the next stage as well. So we encourage more comments like that. But we did design, I believe it's low walls there. I'll have to have a moment to look at the plans again there for the landscape plans. But we at least are considering doing low walls there. And that barrier comment actually came up a couple of times during staff reviews that we need to address that. So it's not going to be just bollards. We want to actually focus people where you see those crossings. You see the kind of white striped crossings there.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And the rest of it will be protected either through landscaping and or low walls there, not trying to create an obtrusive fence, but one that provides security there of keeping pedestrians from crossing all the way through that area.
Oh, that's great. So I have quite a few questions about the Peninsula Ballet Theater.
Yeah.
And staff, jump in, whoever can tell me all the answers to these. So there's a 35-foot height limit for that building. So
they're in 2 spaces, Vice Chair Mallory. They're both on the 35-foot limit, as well as the one on Delaware, which does not have the 35-foot limit. I just wanted to point that out. There's both the studio space and the ballet space. There's two different spaces.
Okay, but the performance one would be on Concar, is that right?
No, the performance one is on Delaware, and the studio.
The performance is on Delaware, and the
Correct.
Studio is on Concar. Okay,
That's correct.
so the one where I'm pointing at this, and you can't even. I'm sorry. So the performance space on Delaware is where the actual seating and stage and all that. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So that does not have a 35-foot height limit.
It has a 55-foot, but not a 35.
55. Okay.
Yes. There are units
All right.
on top of it. Correct.
Got it. Is there underground parking
Yes.
underneath there?
Correct.
And how many levels of underground parking?
So technically only one level of subterranean.
Okay.
And then there's one level of at-grade parking that sits behind in the cavity of the building behind the commercial spaces.
Okay. So the building and that space will start at ground level.
Correct.
Okay. So I was wondering, for a performance space, what are the layers that move that move up through? So I know there's going to be a stage, and I know there's
Yep.
going to be dance space, and there's going to be lighting, and you know, as you move on up your space. So what do you have accounted for as you go from the ground level up?
Yep. So let me, if you don't mind, I'll cut to an issue that I'm very aware of that we've talked to Christine Leslie about over at the ballet, about that space in particular. By the way, we've talked to her about both of these spaces. I want to make sure you know that both of them have been talked about. We currently have in the section of the plan a 12-foot ceiling. That's what's in our current plan.
In the current plan for the performance space?
Correct. Actually, for both spaces, it shows 12 feet.
Oh, okay.
We are aware that the ballet would like, because I'm not an expert on the layers. I'll apologize a little bit about that. I've been told about the layers, so
I didn't know what else to call them.
Yeah, I know, that's fine. I don't know that I could describe them any better than you did. But yeah, so I'm aware of the fact that we want to get to 14 feet. My response has been to Christine, and just respectfully about that, is that at this level, without having further structural engineering and soils engineering, we can't commit to the additional 2 feet yet. I do know, and I'll tell you, there's a couple, and I'll describe a couple of them for them, and maybe Peter could help out when we get there. But there are a couple of things that we can do to pick up that 2 feet, which is extraordinary, by the way. And since we have a height limit, by the way, as you know, on the flip end, we can't raise the up to, but we can't. So that's something that's codified. So, but the extra 2 feet can be at least 2 ways that we can pick up that extra 2 feet. One is that we could, in fact, suppress a portion of the subterranean parking where the vehicle parks head in. This is done in a lot of projects by a couple of feet, so that you have a lower elevation of that head-in parking than you do on the rest of the portion of that parking stall. That is a detail that, frankly, between a structural engineer, soils engineer, and the city, we need to work out, but we can pick up some space by doing that. The other way is to, I think Peter had mentioned it earlier in his presentation, is we could reduce the section of the concrete that goes through that space, again, without having structural and soils engineers' final input on that. We're just going to hypothecate that we can do that, but we could reduce the section in there to pick up, again, whatever we can't pick up on the parking space down below. We are aware of a couple of techniques that we can use to pick up 2 feet worth of space. And frankly, we're committed to picking up whatever space we can for the ballet to make it acceptable for performances. And we sincerely do understand that concern that the ballet has for it. I just, again, it's part of the process that is a little bit painstaking here. We're at a point where we've designed a lot, 176 pages of plans. But frankly, between soils engineers and structural engineers, we don't have that input yet. And you traditionally wouldn't have it until we get an approval of the project. So
no, and I know the soils are an issue there.
It is, and thank you for bringing that up. But we're trying to be very sensitive to the subsidence issues that have happened in the neighborhood, and we have eliminated original intents to actually add another level of subterranean parking because of that. It's not just cost, but there is a water table here, and we're trying to be sensitive to that.
Yeah.
So what we do know is that we don't want to add another layer of subterranean parking. What we do know is that we have techniques where we can pick up 24 inches of space, but we just can't guarantee it at this point because we don't have enough information to do that. I don't know
is the theater, the performance space, does that use the whole building, or are there other uses for the 55-foot high building?
Yeah, so there on Delaware, there's a food hall, there's a restaurant that's immediately adjacent to the performance space, and then another space, and then on top of that is residential. So
on top of the performance space is residential?
That's correct.
Oh.
I think Peter,
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Peter, I think you have a section. I'm not sure if you can go back to it. It might help answer this question, Peter, if you still have screen control. You could go back.
Yeah, absolutely.
How many levels of residential?
We'll see it right here. I'll let Peter answer that question.
It doesn't cut through that particular moment,
Peter, how many levels
unfortunately.
are there? I don't want to guess. So how many levels are above?
There's 4 levels of residential above the ballet space, of the performance space. And again, what was given as a requirement for the performance space was 14 feet. And so, as Brian mentioned, there's a series of methods that once we get a structural engineer on board, which is really the next phase, we can vet. And we think there's opportunity. There's just no way, as Brian mentioned, for us to guarantee that. But for what they're asking for, we think there's a good chance that we're going to get there. We just can't guarantee it at this current moment.
And what you're saying is that you would be addressing it during the building permit phase when you're doing construction documents?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
And through the chair, just to clarify the city staff's perspective, generally interior ceiling height is an owner-tenant matter, as long as the entire building remains under the height limit, which it appears it does, and as long as the interior height limit, conforms to the building code.
The interior height limit of each level.
Correct. So as long as
Okay.
the building envelope is within, the
Okay.
max building height outlined by the
Okay.
zoning code, it remains an owner-tenant matter.
Super. Okay, thank you everybody for those answers. I had a request for a 5-minute break. So if that's okay with everyone, we will do that. And then when we come back, we will have public comment. Hey, Erin.
Yes, hi.
Hi, I just wanted to make sure that we were timing of 5 minutes.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have all of our commissioners present?
Present.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Present.
John, are you back?
I am.
Okay, perfect. Aaron, why don't we open for public comment? And if you would let me know how many speakers we have.
I see that we have 3 hands raised. Vice Chair Mallory, I recommend doing a quick repeat of those commenting instructions.
Okay, I can do that. So during our public comment period, members of the public may speak on items within the commission's jurisdiction. Whoops, I'm reading the wrong one. Hold on.
Sorry, to clarify, I mean the actual like how to comment on the Zoom platform instructions.
Got it. Let me get to the right page. Okay, so to join the Zoom meeting, click on the link at the top of the agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on at the appropriate time. Phone-in participation can be done by calling 408-638-0968 with the conference ID number, meeting ID 833-1401-7477. Press *9 to raise your hand to be called on. So we will continue on in accepting new callers until such time as everyone has been heard.
Okay. The first speaker I have is Rich Hedges. Rich, I'm going to unmute, allow you to talk. Please unmute your microphone. Oh. Mr. Hedges, are you with us? Mr. Hedges, I think you may have your headphones or speaker or microphone disconnected. Can you check your connections, please? Okay, I'm going to come back to Rich Hedges. My next speaker is going to be Barbara Niss. Barbara, I've allowed you to speak. Please unmute your microphone.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for allowing us to speak, commissioners. I am obviously a concerned citizen. I've spoken before on this, and I will use very short time. Rich Hedges might be trying to talk. Because I have sent in comments regarding this study session as well as previous study session. I just wanted to bring up a few concerns that I have and hope that maybe you can get some of the answers in further discussion. One, I was not able to find how many parking spaces there are for residents in the complex, so I just would like to maybe have that number provided tonight. And I apologize, I'm not a professional when it comes to reading all the plans, so that may have been listed, but I couldn't find it. I am concerned about infrastructure. If there's enough in place to handle a project of this size when we already have over 600 units approved on the same corner opposite side. And so I'd like to know the thoughts on that, what's going to happen with sewage, water supply. I also am concerned about the subgrade parking, although I appreciate the design change, and I do see that it's a good design change from a look standpoint, which I did have an issue with the building's look in the earlier design. I'm just worried because I know the water table issues, and we had problems, I think, when Heinz dug out its subgrade parking. So I just want to make sure that that's being addressed. I did hear your comments, and so I'm grateful for that, but I would like to understand better as a layperson how that's going to affect the neighboring cities, because I live in one of the neighboring communities, because I live in Sunnybray, but my friends live in 19th Avenue Park and Fiesta Gardens and Hayward Park. And so I know we're all concerned about that as an issue. I had a question about distance of the daycare from the freeway. I wasn't sure if we could tell how far away from the freeway the daycare is. And if kids are going to be playing outside, I just would want there to be some consideration to pollution issues and the freeway. Another question I had, I'm looking at all my notes, was regarding impact fees for the neighboring communities, things that can be done to make sure traffic is mitigated, to make sure roads are made better and sidewalks are made better because of all of the construction that's going to be happening. And possibly, I'm not sure how to look into this, but maybe permitting parking in the surrounding neighborhoods is something we need to consider, because we've already experienced with Station Park Green that construction people and other people will come into our neighborhoods to park. And with adding 961 more units, that's, I think, at least 961 cars, if not more. And I'm worried that there won't be sufficient parking for those people and they will want to come in the neighborhoods. So if we could look at permitting parking in the surrounding neighborhoods, I'd appreciate that if indeed you deem that a concern. I do appreciate some of the changes that were made. I can't deny that it looks better than it did, that they've opened up access, even though it felt so inwardly structured originally. But I still feel like this is too big of a project on this corner. It's already affecting the neighbors, and we haven't even started on this one. Station Park Green's not even done. The 73 units at AAA building have not started, at least forming as a real building yet. And now we're already looking at 961 more. And right behind that, 189 units over the Caltrain station we know are coming down the pipe. So I'm very concerned about the size. And although I appreciate that the developer took into account look and aesthetic, they did not address this issue at all for us. And it was the primary issue that the neighborhood brought up. We do appreciate that the Peninsula Ballet Theater was taken into account, and we hope that that sticks. And I think I've taken up enough of your time. So those are my concerns and questions. Thank you.
Okay, my next speaker is Adam Lorraine. Adam Lorraine, please unmute your microphone.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. Thank you very much, Erin. This is Adam Lorraine, a 20-plus year resident of San Mateo. I just wanted to give praise for the project update as we see it today, and particularly about the Class 4 bike lanes around this project. That is amazing. It's to me the brightest spot in what we've seen today, and yet we've only really heard about it, and we'll be seeing more about it later. But I really appreciate Tracy clarifying a little bit of this. This is huge. It's a true public benefit, because it's not just going to benefit the residents who end up at Passage, although of course it will, or those who will be customers to the Seed Hall or Trader Joe's, although of course it will, but it will benefit people who live in 19th Avenue Park, people who live in Fiesta Gardens, Bay Meadows, people like me who live in North Central but bike down Delaware to go to the other side of town, to go to Bay Meadows or farther out to Belmont on Delaware. It's going to benefit all of San Mateo, not to mention anyone who gets off at Hayward Park Caltrain. All these people are going to get a significant public benefit out of this bike improvement, not to mention the pedestrian improvements that were mentioned, which are also going to be helpful. So that's amazing. It also shows a commitment, I feel, from the applicant and the city working in partnership to actually reducing traffic and congestion that could come as a result of the added units and commercial in this project. It's one thing, for example, to have something like Station Park Green. I really feel that I don't see a lot of measured changes, some of which the commenter just before me just mentioned, that we're going to make traffic any less of a problem from other developments in this area. But having these bike lanes and pedestrian improvements will really bring the message and make it simpler for people to get out of their cars and use active transportation for short trips, and overall reduce the impact of this development. So extremely important. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I would just note too, on top of that, a couple other things that had come up in previous meetings for this that if it's possible to discuss today would be wonderful. To the previous commenters, the previous commenter commenter asked about how many parking spaces. I was interested about unbundling parking and whether that is still being considered. I'm not sure if that's something that can be brought up today. Also, whether the buildings and the residences will be all electric or not, whether they're going to be using natural gas or if they're going to be all electric. This is something we're moving toward and would be another huge public benefit, frankly, in the long term. But I appreciate the open space in the parks. I think the open up design looks a lot better. I really feel that the applicant has at least tried its best in many respects to be responsive to a lot of public comment related to the ballet, related to the open space and the bike lanes. So I just wanted to thank the applicant and staff for working with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
My next speaker is a call-in speaker. Speaker with the phone number ending in 635. I'm going to allow you to speak. Okay, please press *9 to. Oh, it looks like you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Carolyn Shepard. I'm actually a resident of Belmont, your next door neighbor, but I am concerned about the need for housing and particularly affordable housing here on the peninsula that affects the whole entire region. And I apologize, I haven't been to any of your hearings before, but I do want to compliment you on the beauty and kind of the creative concepts you have included in this project. My question is really regarding the 73 very low income units, and I'm wondering if they include or have set aside any of those that may be extremely low income, you know, that are living on Social Security or disability income, or if the housing project would be accepting housing vouchers to help subsidize those units for those with the extremely low income level. And just out of curiosity, you mentioned a nonprofit developer for this 73 unit building, and do you have that developer selected yet? That's all. Just real brief.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Did we hear back from Rich?
Yes, I was just about to call on him. Okay. He's rejoined and raised his hand. Rich, I've just allowed you to speak. Please unmute your microphone. Oh gosh. Mr. Hedges, I'm going to move on to the next speaker. If you would like, you can try to call in on that phone number. That phone number again is area code 408-368-0968. Meeting ID is 833-1401-7477. My next speaker is the email starting with Stamper. I'm going to allow you to speak. Please unmute your microphone.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Maya Togashi, I actually live on Delaware Street. My pet peeve is the sidewalks. A lot of times these new developments do not include a wide enough sidewalk for pedestrian side-by-side comfort and safety walking and mobility. And particularly in the Concar area, all those new buildings that are coming up by the Station Green complex and the WeWork buildings. And I think it was Medallion, or it's called something else by now. But anyway, that is my pet peeve, the wideness of the sidewalks, which makes it more walkable and safe for pedestrians. The other concern is the intersection between 19th and the 92 eastbound on-ramp. That pedestrian crossing is really dangerous. And I don't know if the developers or the city has considered the impact of this development going underneath the pass, the Highway 92 underpass on Delaware, and the effect of pedestrians walking to cross over from the south side of Delaware Street north. So anyway, that's my comments. And 19th, I believe, is the one that goes by ARCO and the two service stations. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I do see that Mr. Hedges' hand is still raised. I'm going to ask you again to unmute your microphone, Mr. Hedges. Oh gosh. Yeah, unfortunately, it looks like he's having some technical issues with his microphone.
Yes. Rich, is there any possibility that you could call in? Let's give him just a minute to place a phone call.
Sure. Mr. Hedges, I don't know what you're hearing on your end, but when you do unmute your microphone, we're unable to hear you. We're hearing some sort of microphone feedback. Okay, Mr. Hedges has lowered his hand.
Okay. At this point, would it be useful for staff and or the applicant to comment on any of the questions from our public?
So Vice Chair Mallory, this is Brian Myers. If you'd like, I'll take my first shot at answering some of the questions, and certainly would appreciate any additional input from the staff as well, but I'm fairly familiar with the plans and be able to address at least the questions that I heard. And if I miss a question or two, I hope I didn't, but I've been taking notes. We've been going along here. So so from the first commenter, there was a question about and I may not have these in a specific order, but there was a question about the distance of the daycare from the freeway. By the way, just of note, you should know that the original plan that we had, when I say original, as of last year, we actually had a location that was immediately adjacent to the 92 freeway, and we did change that. That was actually a comment we received, I think, from the exact same commenter, but we also heard it from the staff. And so we moved it next to the Paseo, which frankly was a good move anyway. And it's now 300 feet, it's a little bit more than 300 feet from the slope bank of the 92 freeway, which is about a football field long. And again, you know, where you take that measurement from the playground or from the building, it would vary. But it is quite a distance. It was analyzed, and this is what I could let the staff talk about, but it was analyzed when we looked at air quality standards for the project and the EIR. But again, I won't speak to that because that wasn't our document. That was the staff's document. As far as residential parking goes, let me pull up the counts here. I'm kind of working on a couple of different platforms to get my counts right, but we're at 1,328 residential parking spaces. The required stalls are 1,241. So we're parked at a ratio of 1.38 to 1 for the residential units. There was, I'll get to the question about decoupling here in a minute, but that's the ratio for that. We do have obviously separate parking standards for the retail and the site, but the question was about residential parking. We are, when we talk about the neighborhood permitting, that actually was a topic that was brought up during our staff reviews and when we looked at TDM measures as well. Again, maybe I should let the staff speak to that because I don't want to speak out of turn about the policies for the city on neighborhood permitting, but that is certainly something that we'd be willing to explore if that was something that's feasible for the staff to accomplish. Because 19th Avenue Park neighbors there have brought this up to me before. Subterranean parking, that was another issue that was brought up about the soils conditions. So that's exactly why, by the way, we're trying to avoid to go to 2 levels of subterranean parking, because we are, when we talked and had an analysis done by our soils engineer, we wanted to limit that. Interestingly enough, without getting in too much detail, there's a counterpoint in that for a certain level of grading for subterranean parking, it is actually a benefit because we're able to hit bedrock with our parking structure and not have to pound piles. For those of you that are, I'm sure all of you actually are familiar with what that means. So we have very limited piles that we're doing for the project as compared to what it would have been before when we were building on grade with the wrap parking structures. We would have had, frankly, hundreds of piles that would have come with that. And as you know, while that creates stability for the building, it's quite a nuisance for the neighbors to go through that. I think you've had some experience in town in dealing with that issue. I just wanted to mention that. Obviously, we have to have further soil studies that'll be done with more detailed plans, but we're very comfortable with what's been analyzed to date and trying to avoid any issues with subsidence around us. There was a question about decoupled parking. That is one of the items or alternatives that's included in our transportation demand management plan. And again, that's something that we've accepted as a potential mitigation for reducing trips even further through the transportation demand management plan. And again, maybe staff could speak to that, but that is something we've been willing to accept. And we do have all electric residential units. So we actually have, I didn't mention this before, but since the topic came up, we will be taking the deal offered by Peninsula Clean Energy to do 100% renewables on the site. And the best way to accomplish that is to do all electric residential units. I will tell you, we do have limited gas use for the commercial kitchens in the food hall and in the restaurant, but it's very limited on the site. So we'll be able to accomplish a very sustainable design with all electric units and PCE's program for all sustainable resources. The very low income units, there was a question about, if I understood correctly, supportive services, housing vouchers, and the nonprofit partner. All of those are kind of bundled together. So what typically happens, one of the reasons why we appreciated the fact that, that the staff has allowed us to go forward with a separate building is with a nonprofit partner, they can attract subsidies that we couldn't as a developer in our project that will allow for more supportive services and housing vouchers as a potential. We're not committing to that, but I would just tell you that the only way that you could accomplish that is through the subsidies that a nonprofit partner could accomplish. We've worked with two of the more prominent nonprofit affordable housing builders in town. You'd be really familiar with them. We don't have a deal with any one of them yet. We've had them do some analysis for us and have told them that we'd like to talk to them as the plans mature. And again, I don't want to mention names at this time because we don't have an agreement with either nonprofit partner. There are a number in the peninsula, frankly, that could accomplish this, but we did take note of the ones that have been successful in your town that we've at least reached out to at this level. So we will have a nonprofit partner, but we have not entered into that agreement. The last question that I heard was relative to sidewalk width. And I think it was also attached to this, to the concept of the safety of the 19th Avenue 1992 feature, which is to the south of our site. So on sidewalks, I think we've had a fair amount of conversation about what we've been doing for pedestrian improvements through our site and around our site. But we do understand, by the way, as you go further to the south past the 92, that there are some challenges with pedestrian movements through there. I do know, and again, I'll let staff speak to it, there has been an inordinate amount of work that the staff has been doing on some potential changes to 19th Avenue and how that all functions there. None of it's been approved or reviewed by the city yet, but the staff has certainly been working on the reports. I think some of it may have been has been talked about, and I don't want to speak to that out of turn from staff. It has not come up as a condition to our project, but we are considering some participation in that through the development agreement. And that's at the moment, since we haven't negotiated those terms yet, I can't speak to that in detail, but maybe staff could speak to that in more detail. I think I covered it all. I hope I did. The best notes.
You did.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, through the chair, I can fill in where
perfect
staff can fill in. So as Brian mentioned, on the number of parking spaces, over 1,300, and a parking analysis has been done by our TDM consultant, and it has found to be adequate. Questions about the infrastructure. So infrastructure adequacy has been analyzed in the draft EIR. not the conversation for this meeting, but it was reviewed by the commission in April. And again, on the daycare, separate from the distance, the focus of this meeting isn't environmental review, but TACs were analyzed in the air quality report and no significant impacts were posed, and it was found to be within CEQA significance thresholds. Kind of going back to infrastructure improvements, there was a question about development impact fees. The applicant will be paying several development impact fees, such as a transportation impact fee, a TIF, that would result in offsite infrastructure improvements. Question about sidewalk concerns. The project is being reviewed for conformance with the city's pedestrian master plan, and that plan informs sidewalk widths and through zones. And then there were questions posed about the concern for 19th Avenue and the 92 on-ramp and a pedestrian crossing. So offsite improvements aren't immediately in the scope of this application. The city is engaging in corridor study along 19th Avenue to study the traffic impacts along the corridor separate from this project, which took my list one more time. So those are the answers I could respond to. I'm going to defer to Tracy Scormelli of Public Works to touch on a few of the other questions.
Thanks, Rendell.
Thanks, Rendell. I think all of the questions have been sufficiently answered. The only question I think that was was in regards to the residential parking permit in the neighboring neighborhood. We plan on having a condition of approval with the project that would indicate that Concar Passage, the development, will not be eligible for residential parking permit, and that the applicant would be responsible for the costs and the creation and enforcement should an RFPP program go into the 19th Avenue neighborhood. So that's some forethought to go in, because I know there's been concerns with previous projects that have gone in. Again, it would have to meet the guidelines for the residential parking permit. Not all people want to have it, and so there's a process for going through and establishing that parking permit program. In regards to the sidewalks, I think Rendell mentioned it. So they have they meet all the requirements for our pedestrian master plan, including the sidewalk widths that are appropriate for that type of development, and in some cases exceeded those requirements. We are looking at improvements to the 92 undercrossing right now. It kind of narrows down, and the city is looking at, so Concar will be doing significant improvements along their frontage, but the city and the recently adopted bicycle master plan has improved bike improvements along the entire Delaware corridor. So that making that connection underneath 92 is going to be part of that. So that's something that we will be looking at as part of a city project to come in the future. And I think I covered there was some concern about construction parking. Again, we have a condition of approval that the developer must provide for construction worker parking. So that is identified prior to them getting their building permit, and as well as parking in the neighborhood that's enforceable by our inspectors, and they will be conditioned in regards to that as well. Thank you.
So thank you, Tracy. Public comment is now closed, and we will bring things back to the commission for comments and discussion. And would anyone like to start off? John, why don't you start off for us?
Did Mike tell you to pick on me too? Through the chair. Every time I've seen this project and had presentations from staff and from the applicant, they have consistently done what they said they were going to do. The amount of time and effort and attention to detail to address, most importantly, the public's concerns, but also the commissioners, and the architectural review of Larry Cannon is impeccable. This project has transformed itself over the last few years into truly a world-class looking project. The architectural changes are striking. There is no comparison in my mind to what they were. Using the project, the land in the fashion that it has evolved into, with adjusting the parking component, has had a huge impact, positive impact on the overall project. Going all electric throughout the buildings, excluding a minimal for the restaurant and store, is a boon for all the city. The additional open space that was afforded by the reconfiguration of the project is an important aspect for everyone, since it will be public space. Getting the affordable housing increased from the minimum by a substantial number is a huge deal. This project is going to have 50% more affordable housing on it than will the beautiful project on Delaware that is dedicated only to affordable housing. But this one will have quite a bit more, another 40 units roughly. Getting a preschool there, or not a preschool, but a daycare, protected intersections, I can go on. It's a pleasure to see somebody who has really engaged the public and used all of the professional resources available to them, including staff input, to try and fit into a neighborhood and not overtake it. The use of union labor is always a benefit for everybody on a project, including the people who are not working there. So I'm hoping that we were able to get this final package presented to us shortly, and look forward to the final review. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Ramiro?
The chair. Understand that this project has gone through many iterations, many updates over the last several years. But seeing it from the last site plan to what we have seen today, it's very remarkable. It's very, I want to commend the staff, commend the developer and the applicant about taking some of the staff comments, some of the commissioner comments and the public's comments on, number one, increasing more outdoor space. We did increase the dwelling units from 936 to 974, but we also were able to increase the number of affordable housing units that you're offering as well. It's a great architecture design. I look forward, I live a couple of blocks away from there, so I look forward, once it's all completed, to go into the Trader Joe's, to all the other different restaurants and amenities that you have. I like the creation of the arts and the park plaza. Gives individuals, not just the individuals who are living in the area, but also anyone that wants to go and take a walk or a bike ride down to Trader Joe's, they can go and enjoy the arts park or the park itself there as well. So it has a lot of visual great amenities, and also like the added addition of the daycare that's, that will provide additional care and support for so some of the residents or some of the individuals in the area as well. So looking forward to this project to being approved in the upcoming stages, and looking for it to be completed soon.
Thank you. Margaret?
Okay. Thanks for a really great presentation. Peter's walking us through the project in detail, marking it up on screen for us to really see what the, pieces of the the architectural elements and the, the details of it really helped a lot. And since I'm the newest member of the Planning Commission, I wasn't here for previous public hearings, but I've appreciated the, the extent of the information that's been provided for my review, not just for this application, but previous kind of an update to kind of get me up to speed on things. And that was really helpful. So it's a lot to take in, but I think I sort of have a good sense of the progression that's taken place over the couple of years at least, or more maybe, but and all of the meetings that, this gave me a really good background. I also appreciate that you provided the in the packet kind of a breakdown of sort of the before and after, like what the comments were, just a synopsis of the comments and the responses. So, as the previous commissioners were saying that, when there were comments, you guys really responded to them specifically. So that was very helpful. So let's see, I'm gonna see. So specifically, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. I really appreciate that one of the things you responded to was an increase in the amount of the open space. And there's a lot of open space on the site. I can really see that because there's not only the sort of more private spaces within the enclosures of the buildings, then there's the large areas as well. And I look forward to seeing how you kind of address the one question about how, I think it was Commissioner Mallory that asked, how do you, kind of create a barrier between the roadway and where where kids might be playing. So I look forward to seeing that kind of detail, low walls or something that creates a safe condition there without, enclosing it and still giving it this like nice spacious feeling that we have. And if anything, we've learned, as I think I've said on other projects in the past over the last couple months, we've learned how important having outdoor space is, especially we're not a big urban city. We're, kind of a mid-sized city. And so throughout this, whole quarantine thing, we've all really, people have just been using our parks and walking in our neighborhoods. And, it's like we've learned all of that again, just from this whole sheltering in place thing. How important and how lucky we are to live in California where we can do that. So one of the other things, so that was open space. The other thing I appreciated that I think was addressed from previous iterations to the current is that the increased variation in the architectural design. So I think the variety of materials and the kind of breakup of the way the design of the shell and facades of the buildings are done really tied together nicely, really work together nicely, but they are a lot of just, distinct buildings, a lot of distinct details. So that's really well done. It's, sort of tailored and sophisticated in many of the palettes and the detail of the buildings. They're not really sort of huge monolithic things. They're, they're kind of really broken down. So I hope you maintain that and kind of keep that kind of level of sophistication, I would say, as you move forward. The other, and I loved the nod to 19, or I guess it's more than a nod, but the connection to 19th Avenue in terms of the Eichler style design and the modern look of that corner building. That is a really successful kind of element in terms of the architectural design and the scale as well. So that's really successful. So one comment I would have then is my next one, which is the amount of glazing in windows. So many of the units look like they have lots of glazing and lots of windows, and that looks, just really wonderful. And so I have a feeling though that won't be, I didn't necessarily see, that was carried through to the, the low income units or the very low income units. So so I would encourage you to make sure that the low income or very low income units don't look, so distinctly different than all the market rate units. That they are, I like that there's a mix, and it's always a successful project when we see such a good mix of levels of affordability. But so I would encourage you to make sure that the glazing and the details carry through to all the levels of the units. Let's see, I liked the materials, especially that cedar wood look cement panel product that was called out on many of the elevations. And I think I talked about everything. I guess the last thing I would say, which I was happy to hear just now from one of our previous responses to the questions, was the conditions of approval. So the parking permit program, and certainly the construction parking requirements, that if those are conditions of approval, that will go a long ways to make for a successful project with the neighbors and the community. So I'm excited to see the next phase. It's an exciting project. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. So what was interesting when I first started looking at the packet and reading the comments on what triggered the changes over the last couple of years was 3 of the 5 commissioners that are on the commission now were not sitting on the commission when this came through 2 years ago. I did meet with the applicant right after I joined the commission, and it was a really good opportunity for me to see it in the 2018 form. And I was very impressed with the project then. This has been a very interesting process to see it grow and change. We did receive written comments from members of the public, and they were very well written, and the points were very well taken. And I will say here that I encourage you to participate in the general plan process so that your comments and your thoughts can be heard on a citywide level. So what's really great about this spot is that it's really big, and it gives us an opportunity to get a fresh, new community. And I thought that was just so great when we had the Bay Meadows area, that we were able to make it, and it's all cohesive. And so it is very large, but I think it's really, really well done. And I'm very, very impressed with the way it has come about. I'm very impressed with the courtyards. They're beautiful, right there in the middle with the access roads for people to come in and use the facilities. As I said earlier, I am a little concerned about the materials used on the roadway around the roundabout because it doesn't look like a road. And in the picture, in the packet, there were cars and people right in this one spot. And I thought, oh gosh, all we need is for someone to not pay attention and have an issue in the roundabout. So maybe having that designated looking as a road with the materials that are used, or some kind of identifying transition. Also, before I move on to my others, I wanted to echo Margaret and what she said in identifying the Eichler style and some of the buildings that are on the side of 19th Avenue. And I think it's really great to pay homage to some of our established neighborhoods. It's a really great idea. And I also very much liked the private spaces being located near the outdoor spaces. That was a very good planning, and it really amps it up and makes it look like a much larger open space, which is great. So I did want to comment on the styles. And when I went through the packet, I just identified the styles by their numbers. So style 1, style 4, and style 5, I thought were really, really nice. And caveat here, I'm not a big fan of modern architecture, but I am a fan of these. So style 1, I really liked the cement panels with the wood grain. Very, very charming. And style number 4, really nice materials. I think the materials that are being used in these buildings are very, very interesting, but they're still simple and really, really work well with each other. The corner balconies in style number 5 were really attractive and really gave the building some character. I was not wild about style 2 and style 3. And on style 2, I thought it was a little too square and a little too boxy, kind of industrial looking, but I did like the materials. And on style 3, I thought about it and thought about it. How do I explain what it was that I didn't particularly care for? And it's the white squares that appear, and they appear very stark to me on a very natural palette. So in thinking back to the 2018 and 2019 iterations, I thought that was a little more uniform with the use of very interesting materials. I liked that better than the blocky white squares. So if anyone has a bandwidth on that, it would be interesting to look at maybe some different materials or different color for those boxy white areas. That's my 2 cents on that. And if there's anything that can be done to eke out the 14 feet for the Peninsula Ballet Theater, I would encourage that. Not being a ballerina myself, I don't understand the whole needing that space. So if you have dancer A who does a lift with dancer B, it's going to be taller than just a normal person standing in that space. So I think that's how the 14 feet of air space is determined. But I do want to say on that the applicant is providing an amazing community resource here. And I very much appreciate their commitment to the arts on this. It's really above and beyond the call of duty. So thank you for that. Does anyone else have a comment from the commission? No, we have no vote needs to be taken tonight. So I will ask Aaron to make some reports and announcements.
Great, thank you. And you're right, staff will take the comments from individual commissioners this meeting and then meet with the applicant to refine the project before it's back to you again. In terms of upcoming meetings, on June 15th, the council will be considering 2 important planning related items. The first is the council will have a study session at 5:30 p.m. on June 15th to discuss the next steps related to the general plan. So I suggest that everyone tune in for that one. The council will also be discussing what is known as a LEAP application, and that is an application that the state has for grant funding for housing related items and housing implementation related items. So the city could receive a grant of up to $500,000 for things like the updating the housing elements, citywide community benefits program, mechanical parking system, code amendment, as well as the downtown parking code amendment. So those are all on the 15th of June. In July, on July 20th, the council will then be considering a contract for our general plan consultants. So a few important planning related items coming up in June and July, and that's it.
How about general plan?
Oh, that was the first item. So on June 15th, it will be general plan related for the study session that the council is doing.
Okay, so we have it all. Okay.
Correct. June 15th study session with the council at 5:30. And then they'll be considering the contract for the general plan in July, on July 20th.
Oh, got it. Thank you. Okay,
Great. Thank you.
we're all good. Thank you. And our meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.